Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another day of invertebrate zoology. Today, we're diving into Crustacea, and this is kind of part one of two parts of crustaceans as a whole. After today's lecture, we move on into Decapoda. This is just a huge group of animals, and while it seems strange to separate one, really an almost individual species out with the stomatopods, they definitely need to be discussed and talked about. First off, if you're at a facility that's going to exhibit crustaceans, more than likely one of the stomatopods will be there. They're beautiful, brilliantly colored, tons to talk about, which I'm going to do today. Uh, and I don't want to say easier to house, but easier to display because they don't need nearly as much space. They basically fit into that kind of jewel box niche of a smaller enclosure that's almost an accessory animal, but has all the pop you want from an accessory animal when it comes to guest interaction and engagement. So we're going to start with stomatopods. That's what we're going to cover in today's lecture. Decapods definitely deserve their own day. Decapods include, I don't know, all the things like every crab, every lobster, every shrimp, every prawn. So yeah, there's a few things to talk about there. Again, while it does seem weird to have just stomatopods, they you'll see they clearly deserve their own day. Um, so yeah, we'll get into it. As far as the phylum we're under, of course, we're still under Arthropoda. That should kind of be a common occurrence now. You're getting used to that by this point. Uh, but within the arthropods, the the breakdown here is just so unfair. Uh, it's astronomically insane how little yes, us humans, mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, how little we matter in the grand scheme of species out there. We are, you guys have seen lectures previously. If we had a pie graph, you would have to enlarge our slice of the pie just to even see how we were represented. Again, even just mammals as a whole, compared to a group like the crustaceans, which are huge in numbers, of course, still dwarfed by insects, but we also don't know all the crustaceans out there. So there's a lot going on. Um, and an unfair amount to cover. Crustaceans 100% could have their own 4 credit class. Uh, that number wise, like that actually makes sense. They should really have about 12 credits. Insects could have 20 credits, and mammals would have a zero point 0.5 do it on a Saturday credit class that you take over the weekend. If we taught the way that these animals are actually broken out, that's what the program would look like. But of course, they're not going to be not they're not underrepresented in zoos and aquaria. They certainly get their place. My job, though, is to teach you about them so that they're not just accessory animals. They're both education tools, talking points, animals that you want to display, and you could confidently stand in front of a tank and explain, hey, I know this animal looks like a lobster, or I know it looks like a shrimp, but let me go into a 30-minute tirade about why they're so awesome. And that's my job to get you ready for that position of being not only a better caretaker for these animals, but a better educator and speaker to talk about some of the cool stuff here. So, under all these phyla, families, all this stuff, we've got the order of Stomatopoda. It's the mantis shrimp. As you guys can see, I'm going to leave this up for a little bit. Uh, my PowerPoint skills are always really spot on, so it definitely didn't take me a couple hours to get this GIF going, but it does move on your screen. Everyone loves it. It's fantastic. This is who we're talking about today. Mantis shrimp, just so you guys know, is a pretty diverse and large group, but almost everyone knows mantis shrimp by the character you see here, the peacock mantis shrimp. There are 450 species within Stomatopoda. Uh, a lot of the times, I'm not going to say half and half, but for the sake of the lecture, let's just say 50-50. They're bright and beautiful colored, or that more typical cryptic coloration where they're mottled brown. They want to blend in with the sand, maybe some olive drab. So while there are a ton of variety, Typically, if you work in a facility, you're going to talk about the peacock mantis shrimp. You can see from the picture just the most vibrant coloration you'll ever see, uh, crazy cool feeding habits. It shouldn't downplay uh, other mantis shrimp species. It shouldn't outshine them. But of course, from a facility standpoint, yeah, this is the animal you want to display. Nobody's going to get excited about a brown shrimp buried in the sand. That's just the way it goes. It does not have anything to do with how cool they all are. It's just a simple kind of bang for your buck type scenario. This is the animal you want to display at your facility.
I'm not sure if you'll cover this later, but what is the point of being that brightly colored unless they're poisonous?
Oh, that's a fantastic, and we will get into that. But I've never approached it from the point of poison before. Um, so we will cover it. So you guys will have the text on your screen in a little bit. The conundrum here, or the paradox, is the fact that these animals are brightly colored. They're going to actually exhibit bright colors, but be cryptic in nature. Uh, your peacock mantis shrimp and these very bright, almost flamboyantly in your face, hey, I'm colorful, seems counterintuitive. But if you live in a thriving coral reef, these colors actually match everything. Picture your vacation destination advertisements of, hey, come swim down here and scuba dive at this beach. Look at all these amazing colors and corals. Believe it or not, their bright coloration serves as a camouflage. They're actually not sticking out too much. And they do not have any toxin, but as we'll discuss, they are definitely formidable. So it is a warning coloration, but not, and I'm so glad that question was asked, not in that aposematic coloration. Uh, we've got a warning color, definitely, but it has nothing to do with the degree of toxicity. So I don't think in all my time doing this lecture, anybody's ever asked about the toxin level, because it is on par with like a poison dart frog. Very brightly colored, actively announcing, hey, I'm dangerous. But in this animal's case, it's both cryptic because it blends in with the brightly colored, constantly changing, evolving, moving coral reef. And it also blends in with, hey, if you do notice me, I'll also knock your face off. So, a couple good advantages with this coloration style. Uh, they get tons of, uh, like, arguably outside of the puma or the cougar, whatever you call it, or the mountain lion, uh, maybe probably second or third on the list of crazy common names these animals get. Mantis shrimp, mantis prawn, my favorites, split toes and thumb splitters. You'll understand why shortly. Uh, the two names highlighted in red on the bottom definitely come from either beachgoers or fishermen, usually, and their interaction with these animals. It's easily across the board the stupidest name ever assigned to an animal. That's why we use the term stomatopod, because peacock mantis shrimp, we had to get it wrong 3 times in a row. Uh, not a peacock, obviously, not a mantis, and actually not a shrimp. Um, I, it's like we went out of our way to incorrectly identify an animal and give false hope to anyone interested in peafowl, mantis, and or shrimp. Uh, but sure enough, we did it. They're gonna be so far separated. I realize if the picture at your bottom right was boiled, looked red, and was served next to a tub of butter, we're all gonna say that's a lobster or maybe a big shrimp, maybe a prawn. Uh, they're so far removed from this group of animals, it's astounding. And we just slapped this, and I know you guys are sick of hearing me harp on it. This is why binomial nomenclature is so important and scientific names. Uh, it it really has to be noted. It has nothing to do with any of the animals it's named after. All 3 of them are incorrect. They are a very distant relative of shrimp and lobsters. Uh, the divergence happens basically timeline wise, um, give or take 100 million years. Uh, These animals basically branch off from shrimp and lobsters at the exact same time that lobed finned fishes are starting to move onto land. So, all life on Earth as we know it, since the dawn of terrestrial tetrapod life, which includes us, like your first amphibian crawling onto land, is happening around the same time that stomatopods break off from shrimp and lobsters. So, again, most of you being much more mammal centric, think of your great a million times over ancestors at the exact time they were emerging from the primordial ooze. Stomatopods were starting to do their own thing, go into their own clubs. The divergence, despite the fact that we still wind up with a kind of similar looking animal, should speak volumes about the evolutionary history and how far removed they are from shrimp and lobsters. So peacock, obviously they're not. Mantis, yeah, they kind of look like it, but they're not. But shrimp always seems like it's just a weird lobster. It couldn't be further from the truth. We know their path deviated off the shrimp and lobster and crab track at least 400 plus million years ago. If we're finding it in fossil record, that always tells us, hey, there's a good chance there's other fossils. It's one of these hard things to think of in your head. If we find something that's 400 million years old, it's not like we found the first one. You know, there's 80, 100 million years of evolution leading to the point where we could even find them in fossil record. So that's why we always have to use the squiggly line or the give or take 180 million years type thing. That's just when we're able to find and observe. With the group, let me go back for a second, sorry. Lobsters, crabs, and shrimp, yes, fall under Decapoda, but they also fall under Malacostraca. Man, I seriously could talk for hours about Malacostraca. Such a weird, interesting, diverse group of animals. To have a class, so a class of animals of such diversity, it's unfathomable. The diversity that we find here is just off the charts, from shrimp to prawn to crab, as we'll talk about in the next lecture for decapods. One of the misleading parts is when we say shrimp, lobster, crab, it usually translates to what these animals look like on a dinner plate, or what you could order at a seafood restaurant. It's obviously not scientifically accurate, but kind of jars up memories in our head of what these animals look like. Such diversity within a single class, it's unheard of. And especially right here, the crab body plan, it will pop up again in Decapoda. Crabs make it work. You guys will learn about carcinization shortly. Man, it's just a weird phenom in nature of trying to turn everything into a crab. It's maybe the most successful body plan out there. So back to Stomatopoda. While they're very distant relatives, like not even on the chart, the reason they branched off comes from the raptorial appendage. So stomatopods, and again, you guys know, I don't need to explain this too much. You guys know that the reason an animal would break off and venture out past something that obviously works is to carve out another niche. There's too much competition, maybe resource restrictions. These animals branch off, start doing their own things, and then around 200 million years ago, develop the raptorial appendage, a term that's going to be obviously key as far as test question stuff, something you should definitely have saved after we're done today. The raptorial appendage is everything for these animals. It's how they acquire food. It's how we identify them. It's how we separate them. The raptorial appendage is life for the stomatopods. It's going to vary in its form and function, but no matter what, without them, mantis shrimp would not be where they are today. So a couple things that are different from your traditional shrimp. One of them is the stalked eyes. Stalked meaning that they perch up above the body. Okay, so stalked eyes, we've got eyes sitting above the body. Again, if you're a elongated, not shrimp, but shrimp-like form, cruising along the substrate, a lot of the times burying yourself, the stalked eyes help you get a better view as opposed to just seeing the sand that you've almost immersed yourself in. Somebody asked the question earlier, that bright coloration. If you look at this picture, it's a great example. You can see all the coloration in the background. They almost are camouflaged, even though they're that bright color look almost absurd. The pageantry is on full display. But believe it or not, when they get into these coral reefs that are filled, hopefully if it's not polluted and coral bleached, filled with bright, exuberant colors, very vibrant in that area. So we do have a weird paradox again of bright coloration, but also cryptic. The idea here is that, and it's going to get way more complicated than this, but for now, on this slide, that cryptic coloration, yes, you can blend into any coral reef environment. When we start talking about how mantis shrimp see, the colors take on a whole new meaning. So it's twofold with both cryptic, I guess threefold. Cryptic coloration, because you can blend in. You're brightly colored if something does want to mess with you, so you do pose a warning signal, not from a toxin level, but from a punching level. And then third, mantis shrimp see differently than we do, so that coloration is going to come into play there for breeding and communication. This is what your typical mantis shrimp look like. About, again, a little more than half of the species are that mottled brown, sand colored, algae colored form. Again, that doesn't make them any less cool. It just makes them a little bit harder to justify. Like if you're trying to get one of these animals in your facility, makes it a little harder sell to use up a tank to display one of these animals. If it were up to me, my zoo would be filled with all kinds of mantis shrimp. There'd be a whole hall of mantis that you could walk through, seeing all the different varieties. There'd be feeding demos every 5 minutes, see how these animals eat, hunt, acquire prey. But nobody's given me that zoo yet. And so I get why it's a hard sell. But just realize that even though we're going to talk about the peacock a lot of them look like this. Again, not a knock. I'm not cryptic coloration shaming here. Still really cool animals, just not as popular to display when you're talking about a decapod. All right, you guys are going to get real sick of these two images real quick, but here we go. The identification of the structures here is paramount to your success in understanding decapod body plans. And what I mean by that, every appendage you see is, it's so important to understand where on the body they attach, what their function is, and which one, if anything, has been modified. At the left side of your screen, we see the dorsal and ventral aspect, respectively, of the animal. The picture on the bottom right, it'll come up again, but take a second on this one. The bottom right picture is exactly the diagram that will appear on your exams as far as labeling. So we're going to go through everything. Antenna and antennules, one having a chemosensory function, one having a tactile function. The eyes, the rostral plate is what sits over and basically acts as a shield coming up to the eyes. Of course, they're stalked, so they can stick out and move, but they can kind of retract under that rostral plate. Your carapace covers the central part of the body, but your carapace really covers, in this case, I guess, the head, really. Brain case, things like that. Let me get my pencil out here. Separation here is really important, and this is true for all invertebrate species. It doesn't look like much, but there is a clear delineation here. We have, draw this line all the way down. three very separate, very intentional structures occurring here. And don't worry if you're not following everything. The text is coming up soon. I just wanted to use the visual. We have swimmerets or swimming appendages, locomotory or walking appendages, and feeding appendages with the maxillipeds. One of the maxillipeds has been modified to the raptorial appendage. So let's talk about all that. With the thorax itself, again, typically you're going to have head, thorax, abdomen. If you just take an animal like an ant, for example, head, thorax, abdomen, three very easy to identify body parts. The maxillipeds. Maxillipeds is going to be the term for a hunting, feeding, or manipulatory appendage. They're not jaws. They're not mandibles in that sense, but they are used to start separating and basically do a lot of the chewing ahead of time. So they're the pieces that are going to picture like, I don't know, tweezing your eyebrows, something that can go in and pluck at the prey item, but you're not really chewing anything. You're just taking off tiny pieces. That's about as close as you get to feeding for these animals and chewing. Starting from the mouth itself and basically the front of the animal, the second pair of maxillipeds, that's what's been modified into the raptorial appendage. All right, so we have 5 pairs total. It's a lot. That's why these animals get the name stomatopod, meaning stomach mouth. It's like their entire front of their body is dedicated to feeding, hunting, acquiring prey. So that second pair has been modified into the raptorial appendage. Again, we're going back to the picture. A little bit easier this one's a little hard to translate, but here you can see it pretty well. We've got from the head, there's one maxilliped that's tucked behind here. Here's your second pair, the raptorial appendage. And then 1, 2, 3 more pairs of maxillipeds. So 5 in total. The second one has been modified to be the insane raptorial appendage. All right. I know it's a lot. The reason we are kind of going so hard with the anatomy here, this is what separates stomatopods from decapods. With decapods, for example, we know deca meaning 10, pod meaning feet. A lot of your lobsters look like this with 4 pairs and then a big lobster claw. This is the modified periopod. It's not a modified maxilliped. Does that make sense? Here we have a feeding appendage that's been modified. With decapods, we typically have a locomotory appendage that's been modified. So being able to understand that distinction is, I just can't tell you the importance, both from a field study, a husbandry aspect. If you want to go like the marine biology route, knowing what appendage you're looking at, where it's attached, and why it was modified tells you just an infinite amount of information about the animal. You know how it's classified, you know the lineage, you know where it comes from. Like it's just so important. I know it seems kind of trivial possibly right now, but is really, really important to understanding these animals better. So I'll leave this up for a second. You will have this diagram available to you in your course shell, but this is exactly how it'll appear on your exams. It looks like this, and you fill it out like this. Everything in order. There could be possible explanations of, hey, what do the maxillipeds do? What are their function? Or what are the periopods or pleopods? What's the telson and the uropods do? So there might be future opportunity to expand on this, but this is the diagram you all will be labeling for exam purposes. Sorry, I'll leave that up for a sec. There won't be anything tricky. It'll be, because of the exam structure, you won't actually fill in the blanks you see on this picture. Below will be a number, box 1, box 2, box 3. So it'll be a typed out thing at the bottom. Just make sure you follow it however you do it, counterclockwise, clockwise. Exact same diagram, exact same identification. But again, keep in the back of your mind, it's not just labeling. There's a good chance you're going to be asked to describe the function of some, all, a few structures and what they really mean to the animal. So, behind the raptorial appendages, we have those three pairs of maxillipeds. Just a sec, we're going to look at it again. One pair hidden, raptorials, 1, 2, 3. Then we have three pairs, so 6 in total, walking limbs. We call them locomotory appendages more often than not, but the correct term for them are the periopods. The abdomen, and this is what confuses people. Sorry, I know I keep going back and forth, but I think having the visual along with the text helps. The abdomen, the separation's right here. And this is true of almost every single arthropod out there. If it's a locomotory appendage, it will always be attached on the thorax. Let's take a spider, for example. Oops, that's not a very good start. Maybe here's the head, abdomen, even a black widow. Let's do a different spider. Even though the black widow looks like it just has legs all over it, they always attach to the thorax. All locomotory appendages start at the thorax. The abdomen shouldn't have anything on it. Usually the abdomen is the portion of the body that controls all the viscera. So internal digestive tract, reproductive tract, things like that. So the spider that I masterfully drew here might look like it has legs for days going every direction, but they all attach to this tiny area in the thorax. The abdomen, if it does contain appendages, as we see here, let me get all this off your screen, sorry. As we see here, if it does contain appendages, they're usually very modified in their function and form. In this case, the swimmerets. So this is where the abdomen comes into place. We have what we call pleopods. So periopods are the walking limbs. Pleopods are the swimming limbs. This is also the site of all the respiration. The gills are located here. I wanted to go back to the visual again, but let's get through uropods and we'll talk about them both back with the image up. Pleopods are, again, typically called swimmerets. It's what allows, it's almost like spirit fingers. It's very just tiny little movements that allow the animal to, I don't even want to say swim because it's almost like fluttering along the seafloor. You're able to flutter up and back down like a magical sprite from the forest. And that's what the pleopods do. So again, it's a limb attached to the abdomen, but not really. It's a tiny little spirit fingers that help you both breathe and swim through the water. At the end of the tail, for almost every, every arthropod out there, the terminal segment, so if there's something that extends past the abdomen, it's going to be called the telson. So telsons would be found in horseshoe crabs, in scorpions. So you've got your abdomen, something that extends past it, that's your telson. Here we have a telson. It's going to be flanked by a pair of what we call uropods. So we've got a bunch of pods to figure out. Again, all need labeling, descriptions, identifications, and what their function is for all these animals. Periopods are your locomotory appendages attached to the thorax on the front of the body. Pleopods attached to the abdomen. This helps us swim. Uropods help us communicate, snap backwards. We'll talk about that in a second, and are an extension of the telson. Let's see if I have the, yeah, perfect. We have the visual up here. So again, and I know at this point you're probably like, okay, we get it. We know that they have appendages. It's going to change drastically when we switch over to decapods. So it's important to understand the difference right now, helps us get an idea of what the terminology means, so that when we see an animal with a modified periopod versus a maxilliped, we know we're looking at a completely different species separated by 500 million years of evolution. So yeah, it's a little important to make the distinction. So upper half, locomotory, feeding, and these animals have five. These are the pleopods or the swimmerets. Here's the telson. So this is basically the extension off the abdomen. The telson is this terminal tail part. It's going to have a lot more, and you can see it great right here. It's going to have a lot more dexterity than the rest of the body. Picture like picture a vacation time and you're taking a flight somewhere. If you've gotten the window seat and you're by the wings, you know when your plane's coming down, they're able to adjust that wing flap and put it down or up to slow their speed, straight to keep going. Picture, I guess, I'm trying to work on the analogy here. This is your airplane wing. This is that flap or the rudder to steer, turn, slow down, speed up, things like that. So yes, this is still important, but this helps the animal go. This helps the animal do a lot more. It's more dexterous, but part of the same structure. The uropods here. Sorry, let's get all the arrows off. The uropod is a modified pleopod, so a modified swimmeret. And this is another thing that's going to be super important in the transition from Stomatopoda to Decapoda. Uh, most of your decapods have pleopods, so swimmerets. Not all of them have uropods as complex as this. If we're going to, let's use the airplane analogy again. Here's your wing. This helps you fly. Here's the rudders or the wing flaps. Here's your turn signals. These are able to move even more dexterously. The uropods, tons of dexterity, tons of individual movement that don't affect the rest of the animal's body. So wing, rudder, turn signal. Lots of complex movements towards the terminal end of the animal with the telson and the uropods. All are going to be vital for how these animals thrive and function. So I'm going to go through this step by step. I will leave it up in case everybody's jotting down notes. But we've got a ton of terms that we just learned. Let's go through each one with an actual standard definition. Maxillipeds. These are the feeding appendages. They function with the mouth. They are not the mouth. They help pluck and piece things out to get that to the mouth so that it can be consumed. This is basically as close as the animal has to a chewing apparatus. But again, it's more just, it's like cutting really small bites for a little kid type thing. You're able to separate out, but there's not a lot of actual mastication that occurs. There's not real chewing. The raptorial appendage, go ahead.
For the maxillipeds, in terms of like mammals or something, if you're trying to think about it that way, they're almost like external teeth.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Let me think of a good example. It's maybe if we're talking mammals, let's go with like a cat. With cats, you have obviously, let's take a tiger, for example, obviously a huge row of very intimidating teeth. But the main thing they start consumption with is the tongue. It's going to scrape hair off, kind of start that feeding process. If you look at any of your fossorial animals, so animals that burrow, an animal that goes down and can bite onto something but has to use its front limbs to actually shred it to make it consumable. African clawed frogs come to mind for me. An animal that can grab a hold of something very well, very effective predators, but can't get that chewing process started. So you're going to shred it. And the raptorial appendages and the maxilliped, or the raptorial appendages are a little unique. Maxillipeds are like using a mortar pestle to break down your food, and then you can consume it easier. So yes, externalized teeth, but it's not the mouth. I guess that's the main point. But great question. Like, they help the mouth, but they are not. I just don't want you guys to think that they have like 10 pairs of mouths just raw, like it's some crazy space monster. Um, so yeah, they're helping break down the food uh, before it gets to the mouth because the mouth is very limited on its actual ability to eat. So maxillipeds across the board, we're going to find these in everything within the Crustacea group here. They're always going to have feeding appendages. Not always five. That's what makes Stomatopod unique. Adding to that uniqueness, the raptorial appendage. But all these terms come up. It's like again and again. Raptorial appendage is the only one that will only appear here. But all these terms are going to come up. We need to be able to identify what structure we're looking at and its purpose and function on that animal because they're all going to be different. There's going to be 5 pairs here, 2 pairs on another one, 10 pairs of periopods on the next animal. So again, I know anatomy-wise it's a little heavy, but it's important to get down, especially before we move into Decapoda. Periopods are locomotory appendages. The pleopods, again, swimmerets is typically the term that a lot of people are familiar with. These are swimming appendages, though. They're filamentous, branched, move very quickly, again, kind of that spirit finger movement, but are the site of respiration as well. Telson is anything that extends past the abdomen, usually. In this case, it fans out. And then the uropods are an extra set lent to Stomatopoda that have a lot more dexterity. We will find uropods on almost all the Decapoda that have a telson. So I'll do my best here. Picture you're at Red Lobster. You've ordered a nice big lobster claw or tail, excuse me. On a lobster, this looks like a just really crappy Christmas tree. On a lobster, though, here you have your meat that you want to eat. That's what you're going to pull out and dip in butter. You have the fan tail, and the uropods really are just attached. They're an extension to or in addition to the telson, but you can tell they're not independent of one another and able to move. So almost all your decapods are going to have uropods. They're just not going to be as, they don't have the functionality that we see with Stomatopoda. Let's get that terrible drawing off of here. So I'll leave that there for a sec. Again, jotting all these down because while identifying the graph you're going to have, the image, there's a good chance it comes up of, let's go a little more in depth, explain what these limbs do. Last time we'll look at the visual for it again, but I think it helps. I wish I could do them all side by side, but it's just too much text and too good of pictures to have on the same one. So hopefully this helps make sense of what we're looking at. So all of these maxillipeds, all of these feeding appendages, gives the animal its name. Again, stomach, mouth. There's no other crustacea out there with so many appendages dedicated strictly towards feeding. This is the equivalent of going to a buffet and having 8 arms so you could carry 8 plates of food. Like, this animal has dedicated its life to acquiring and then consuming its prey. It gets that silly, let me make sure I didn't skip a slide. Sorry. Gets its silly mantis name from the fact that it does slightly resemble a praying mantis in kind of that resting form. And again, you guys are all familiar with my amazing artwork. Forgive me for what I'm about to do. Here's your praying mantis. Oops. It's already off to a good start. Okay, praying mantis. We've got arms that look like this, right? The idea for a praying mantis is here comes the fly. Buzz. You extend out, so it comes out like this. And hopefully this amazing drawing is making sense to everyone. But basically you're looking at like opening a pair of scissors and closing it. You extend out, collapse back in. While these animals do look like praying mantis, their arms operate the exact opposite. It's folded so that the animal actually extends up and out, not like a scissors opening and then shutting. So I'm sorry, I know my artwork's horrible. I wish there was a better way to do this. Um, it's not the pinching motion, it's an outward haymaker punch to end the fight type thing. And then the actual movement of drawing the raptorial appendage back is a lot slower. So here we want to extend out and again, scissors, I guess, is the best analogy I have right now. We want to pinch something very quickly with a true praying mantis. Here we want to go out as hard and fast as we can, and then we can come back at a slower pace. And if I was just on mute right now and you're looking at this, I'm pretty sure I didn't get the point across. But hopefully with the verbal explanation, it makes a little bit of sense. The raptorial appendage A, like I said, is what gives these animals kind of their namesake and allows them to be some of the most effective predators out there, albeit very strange predators. The fun part about talking about mantis shrimp, aside from their crazy looks, comes from the terminology we get to use. We separate them basically down the middle with not their coloration, but what equipment is attached at the end of those raptorial appendages. We have two attack modes. One is the spears and one is the smashers. Again, super fun terms. It's like two tribes, the spears and the smashers, and both have developed raptorial appendages that operate differently. The thing I want you to keep in mind is with this change of equipment, it tells us almost everything else about the animal too. Knowing what the terminal segment of the raptorial appendages tells us habitat, tells us prey species, usually breeding too, competition, aggression. Like it's I don't know what good now. It's the fingerprint for the animal, like in a criminal database. From the terminal in there, it's like putting a fingerprint down, and I know your whole backstory. I know where you're going to live, what you're going to eat, what you like to do, if you're aggressive. Um, I probably could have thought of something more clever there, but yeah, it's their fingerprint. It tells us a lot about the animals. In this case, though, we only have two fingerprints to choose from, but once we assess that, we can make a lot of conclusions about how these animals operate. So this is the equivalent of what I was trying to draw earlier with the praying mantis version. The animal sits, and again, visually it looks like a praying mantis where everything's folded up. But you can see from this, if here's the shrimp itself, and that's attached there, it's designed to shoot out and up as fast as it can, or in this case, out and forward. So it's looks appearance-wise similar to a praying mantis, functions completely opposite. It's because of the extra appendage there, whereas a praying mantis wouldn't have this segment. This would be gone. We'd have teeth right here, and the animal is designed to grasp out and bring back as fast as possible. Here, everything's designed for moving forward. And, sorry, it's all made possible from the funniest and silliest, and I don't want to knock these guys. They have about 500 million years on me, so they know what they're doing. But it's kind of one of those, like, if you're having computer problems, one of those things where you like unplug it and plug it back in. Like, oh, that was an easy fix. I really overthought this. And these animals have figured it out through what we call the saddle. It's the, and again, I'm not, when I say it's simple, it is, but it took millions of years to get here. Simple and so effective. The saddle is what allows these animals to have all these incredible abilities when it comes to the strike force that they have. And it's set up through just common physics. You basically have, all right, I'm going to try another analogy. Tell me if you're following it. You're able to pull back. The resting position means that you've pulled these extensor muscles back. Instead of having to flex and keep your picture right now at home doing a bicep curl or having your arm curled up in a fist like you're about to get in a fight. Uh, you can feel your muscles straining to hold that position. Instead, we use these muscles to pull back, and then instead of releasing, they just stick onto the saddle. Uh, so again, analogy wise, I'm going to try something here. Picture a if and man, hopefully hopefully some of you at least know what I'm talking about. If anybody's ever set a real mousetrap, the kind where you have the metal square bar you have to pull back and then put the straight bar through. It's very delicate. It's arguably, I had to do it when I was very young. My parents thought that apparently would be hilarious. It's a little intimidating the first couple times you do it because you know for a fact that the second you let go, it's just going to snap on your fingers anyway. But picture pulling that mousetrap back. You pull the metal bar back, set the trigger in, and hopefully very slowly, like you're defusing a bomb, back away from it. That's kind of how the saddle works. Once you do this pullback of the raptorial appendage, this is the equivalent of that bar on the mousetrap. You just set that in place and you have all this energy stored, but you're not using any energy yourself. So it's taking no musculature on your part to have this spring loaded trap ready to go. It's kind of like I don't know, cocking a gun, where you've got the trigger pulled back, ready to go. So I don't know, use whatever analogy you want. It takes no, aside from the actual initial setup of pulling this muscle back, it takes no energy whatsoever for the animal to be locked and loaded, so to speak, in the sense that that thing can fire off at any time. And all they're doing is releasing that muscle. They just pull it off the saddle. The rest of the arm does itself. It's going to shoot forward, operate on its own. It's important because the power and force these animals are able to exhibit and exert on their unfortunate prey. With there's no physical way to do it with musculature. Um, it's okay. So picture a baseball pitcher. Uh, if you want to throw a 120-mile-an-hour fastball, you're going to have to pitch every day. You're going to have to work out. You're going to have huge biceps. Hopefully, you don't skip leg day. But you're going to be putting in some work to get that arm strong enough to throw a 120-mile-an-hour fastball. In this case, we put in literally no work. The arm's just going to operate on its own. It's like constantly being cocked back, like I said, ready to throw that pitch, but I'm not having to build up any muscle to do it. I need enough muscle to hold this back, set the mousetrap, and just wait for it to go off. The speed and power, again, that these animals are able to exhibit can't be done on an animal this size by musculature alone. So the saddle's what allows this whole thing to kind of take place. And you can see here too, these are our two spears versus smashers. The club at the bottom of your screen, those are your smashers. Up here, obviously, are spears. With spears, we're going to have what we call dactylar teeth. Sometimes you'll see them labeled as dactylar spines. They're used to impale prey. The picture here is really good to highlight how they look. It doesn't do a great job of highlighting the function. This whole thing is supposed to, again, your animals here, is supposed to go up and out. It does look a little more praying mantis. I just like the image of the dactylar teeth, but it's designed to basically shoot up from the bottom and be like from the old war movies, like one of those spike traps where people will be running through the forest and then all of a sudden, bam, giant pokey sticks everywhere, horrifying end to whoever was running through the forest. It's designed to be a spring-loaded trap that spears itself forward and impales the prey. The, again, other difference here is after, here's Mr. Fish, he's gotten impaled. I don't have to worry like a praying mantis does about pulling the prey immediately back to my mouth. It can be a slower process. I've already stuck my fork in the piece of meat, if you will. I can take my time now getting it to the mouth. there's not really the hurry there to snap back as fast. By no means are you taking your time, but it's not anywhere close to the speed at which the raptorial appendage is shunted forward. With smashers, same concept here as far as the whole idea is to push them out as fast as possible. You're throwing a haymaker for sure. But and man, this description has gotten. If anybody has a better one for me, let me know. Uh, Gotten more difficult over the years because people just don't have the same traditions as before. Back in the day, you used to be able to go to the grocery store and there'd be like a whole nut section where you could get things like walnuts. Uh, Maybe around Christmas time it still pops up. But if any of you guys have ever seen a walnut, this is going to sound weird. Uh, you know, it's a fused together. That I mean, they have things like nutcrackers to take care of it. Uh, it looks though, if you actually have seen a walnut that is not shelled yet, uh, you can tell there's a point of fusion. It looks like maybe you took two halves of a walnut, sandwiched them together, and where they met, it has a ridge to it. I guess a ridge is a good term. Um, it has a very noticeable spot where two halves have met, combined, and then calcified themselves out to ensure that fusion stays in place. Uh, I can't imagine a lot of people here are big time golfers, but if you are, this is the equivalent of taking like your big driver for that huge Happy Gilmore hit. Uh, Everybody knows the driver is a huge club, but there is a true sweet spot on it. Uh, you can identify it, you can see it, you can mark it. It's what you're trying to do with your club every time. So while this is a big club apparatus, it's not just it's not like a caveman club where all you're looking to do is bludgeon something. There's a very definitive sweet spot, a calcified elbow that runs at a ridge like standpoint across the elbow so that no matter what, yeah, I'm going to bash the heck out of whatever I'm attacking. But man, if I hit it clean right on this sweet spot, it's going to do twice the damage. So there is a very, very specific design behind it. It is not, I mean, I don't want to say it's not. I was going to say it's not just a bludgeoning tool, but it's a precise bludgeoning tool. I guess that's a good way to describe it. When it comes to the bludgeoning, it's it's amazing how these animals work. You got to figure all this bludgeoning, these haymakers that you're throwing, spearing fish that are struggling. Uh, it's gonna cause some damage. It's like a UFC fighter or a boxer. Eventually, you take that many blows to the head, or in this case, the hands. You're gonna have to retire. Um, it's just too much wear and tear on the body. Here, though, because the raptorial appendage is the most important part of these animals, they're going to be able to regrow them, uh, especially with smasher species. Uh, this is again another adaptation that these 5 pairs of feeding appendages or maxillipeds come into play. Uh, with let's just use the smashers for example. It's like having you guys have all seen the boxers tape up their hands. Let's say now you're punching a punching bag forever. That tape's going to wear off. Uh, Maybe you call it a day and you're like, hey, I have to leave the gym now. In this case, if you were a mantis shrimp, you just rip your hand off and grow a new one. Um, these animals, once an appendage becomes damaged, the other 4 pairs of maxillipeds reach over, rip it off entirely, and the animal's going to molt and regrow that raptorial appendage. It's I don't know, it's kind of like a Terminator type thing where the cyborg comes in and has one arm that's bad. They'll just tear it off and then go to the lab and have a new one put on. There's no sense in waiting for it to heal. It's your bread and butter. It's how you make your living. So these animals will rip off their own raptorial appendage, and then between 3 and 4 successive molts, have a brand new one ready to punch and fight in place. So they're already pretty savage, even to themselves. Just wait till we talk about what they do to other animals.
How do they eat, like, in between the time that the raptorial appendages grow back?
Man, that's an excellent question. And it actually has a logical answer, but it should be addressed. When the animal replaces its raptorial appendage, you've got to figure that they've just eaten, right? So you've just knocked out this bivalve or mollusk, beaten the heck out of it. Your raptorial appendage is damaged. You're going to eat, consume all that food, then rip your raptorial appendage off. You've basically think of it like a tadpole turning into a frog. Uh, you've absorbed enough food that you know, yeah, it's going to be a tough go of things for a little bit, but I've got the energy in my body to eventually replace this. So that is the one caveat, and I'm so glad that was asked. You have to have had enough energy stored in the body to know that you're going to replace that raptorial appendage before you tear it off. The second you have kind of a again, this is just a silly analogy. When you have a full stomach, you know, hey, I can rip this off because eventually I'm going to be able to regrow it. If you're sitting there starving, the animal might say to itself, like, hey, maybe we should wait a minute till we start tearing appendages off. Let's get ourselves taken care of. But typically, that damage occurs right after feeding or hunting. So you're probably going to be sitting on a full stomach and feel pretty confident in your decision to remove that. But great question and definitely should be addressed. So awesome job. As far as how all this gets started, from what we know, the evolution takes a pretty unique course here. Essentially, what we have is we know that 400 or 500 million years ago, they branched off, but we don't really know why. And so we started looking more into it. It's determined now that it starts off with lobsters and crabs are basically out in the open. They're constantly just moving around, grabbing prey, doing their thing. The evolution of the stomatopod stems from the fact that they wanted to basically be ambush hunters. So they start burying themselves in the sand, waiting for things to come by, and then grabbing them. With the raptorial appendage in their evolution, this is kind of a chicken and the egg type thing. It's, I don't want to say 100% proven, but the general consensus is that the spear appendage is developed first, which should make sense. First thing you want to do is be able to ambush. You're going to sit there, wait for a fish to come by, reach out with your crazy javelin arm, spear your fish, and then eat. As all these spear stomatopods become more prevalent, to carve out another niche, that's where the smashers come in. So we go from being a malacostracan, so along with shrimp and crabs and lobsters, we go from that 500 million years ago, decide, hey, we're going to do our own thing. We're going to try to ambush, start developing raptorial appendages, start devoting a lot of the bodies and nutrients of the body towards feeding appendages. Now I'm going to be a stomatopod. I'm going to start spearing stuff. A lot of spears show up, and then we say, hey, let's go to the coral reefs and become smashers. So that's kind of the evolutionary timeline for these animals. With this incredible prey acquisition style of sitting, lying in wait, and then instantly bursting out of your hiding place and spearing a fish mid-air, mid-water, whatever you want to say. Mid-air certainly sounds better. It comes with a few caveats. You're not just going to be able to have this cool, basically, like, think of it like a slingshot pulled back. You're not going to be able to sit there and still hit your target every time. So they're going to have to develop something else. And that has to do with the eyesight. Guys, I'll be honest with you, this is probably the hardest part of any lecture to comprehend. So please ask if you need clarification. When we talk about the eyesight of other animals, it's not fathomable for us to comprehend what I'm talking about because we've never seen it. I can't tell you there's colors you haven't seen because you've never seen those colors. It'd be like somebody their whole life having a, what are they, 12 or 24 count Crayola boxes, and then being like, hey, there's also a 160 count set. It's like cool, but I can't visualize those colors. I've never been exposed to them. Does that make sense? It's like the old school movies with the bloodhounds, how they can smell everything, and saying, "Oh, bloodhounds can smell this." Like, okay, all I can smell is like something in my crock pot. Like that's about the extent of my investigatory olfactory cells. I know if somebody's cooking dinner. That's the extent of how my nose works. Um, and with vision, it's even more difficult. Being able to see in light sources that we can't see in is tough for us to visualize. Man, that's a lot of like weird words that shouldn't be said together. Being able to see in something we can't see in is tough to see in, uh, but it's true. For example, one of the examples is like an X-ray. We know with an X-ray what the inside of something looks like, but we've had to develop a machine and a way to print that out so that our eyes and brains can make sense of it. It's impossible for us to imagine an animal seeing in X-ray vision. Uh, Again, we've developed technology to make up for our lack of eyesight, binoculars, telescopes, things like that. Um, Black lights are another one. We have kind of some tools in place, but it's really hard for us to picture an animal that can see in all these different scopes and ranges and fields of vision. Um, and that's where mantis shrimp come into play. They have, and if you guys like birds and you're falconers, maybe somebody wants to argue with me. They have the most advanced vision among crustaceans. The asterisk there, because through all my research and work in this field, I think the greatest vision of any animal ever to have lived. Prehistoric now, um, humans with all our technology, these animals can still see better. And that happens through a lot of things going on. So, first off, the eyes are assembled of what is called ommatidia. Um, Ommatidia, think about your iconic picture zoomed in on a fly or a bee, and you've got all those hexagon, octagon shaped plates on the eye. Does everybody know what I'm talking about? Like, zoom in on a fly's eye, it looks like a billion screens on at once. So the entire eye is assembled of a bunch of ommatidia. Ommatidia are small lenses that can detect movement very quickly, but they can't get any detail. So it's like it's almost knee jerk reaction. You know, if there's a shadow or something moves really quickly, you can jump, but you have no idea what it was. It's like a horror movie. Something moved in the hallway. I'm going to hide. I have no idea what just happened, but I saw some movement. Now I'm freaked out. Um, that's what the ommatidia do. They allow the animal to get very rapid input, knee jerk reactions to something visual, a visual stimuli in their environment. So we've got, again, picture like a fly or a bee. We've got this one singular eye covered in ommatidia, so we know we've got movement covered. Again, probably pretty important if we're going to start off as a spear species. We need to know immediately if something swims above us so I can reach out and stab it. Then comes the midband. The midband is completely unique to Stomatopoda and sets them apart visually from almost every other animal in the world. The midband's right here, again, midsection, midband, and you can see what it does to the pupil. So just for a visual representation, pupil is the black part. Everything kind of pink or red or white here, that's all the ommatidia. So you've got just a giant sensory organ sitting right there. The midband, though, is what really separates these animals out. How does it improve on our model? Well, quite a bit. Uh, we have three color receptive cones. Uh, you guys maybe have heard through mammals or birds, possibly cones and rods. That's what makes up the components of the pupil in the eye, allow us to interpret color, things like that. Mantis shrimp blow that out of the water. They carry 16 cones in each eye, and Again, I'm struggling here because the concept's so strange because we're not able to do it. They're able to adapt their vision based on the environment around them. All right, what does that actually mean? Uh, okay, so you've got an animal that's able to see significantly more colors. So again, kind of the equivalent of that 12 pack of Crayola versus 180 pack. Uh, let's say our eyes can only see the colors in the 12 pack, and the 180 pack looks the exact same to us. We're like, okay, it's all a bunch of browns. These animals can see all of the uh, different unique colors. Does that make sense to everybody? They can see significantly better and more diverse than we can. Now, that already on its own, like high five, mantis shrimp. Uh, good for you. That's awesome. Uh, where this changes is the fact that they're able to adapt their vision based off that environment. So, you guys are all probably way too young to know this, but back in the day, TVs used to have dials or knobs on them where you could adjust the aspect and ratio of your TV. You could make it more green, more red. Um, you'd have to spin the wheel underneath the television set to change the aspect ratio and the color saturation of your television set. These animals are able to, once they get into an environment that's, let's say, for the sake of right now, it's going to get even more complicated. Let's say we'll just use blue. You're in the ocean, everything is blue. Instead of being able to see all the different colors of blue, you can adjust your television set. They adjust their eyes to see better in blue. Your eyes get um, tuned in to a blue environment, and then you're able to see even further saturation. Uh, I know it sounds weird. Well, hell, we live in Colorado. You guys have all been out when it snows and it's sunny out, and you go back inside, and even if you have the lights on, it's very dark in your house. This would be able to instantly correct that and see now in a highlight, being outside with the snow and the sun, or a low light environment, and all of a sudden, instead of your eyes adjusting, you can see even better in that environment. Um, and they're able to do this just like the knobs on the TV, almost instantly. So not only can you see more colors, more light spectrums, you're able to then say, it's kind of like switching on night vision. You're able to say, let's switch vision mode to um, polarized light in green, and bam, now you're set up for perfect definition in a polarized green blue environment. So yeah, it's kind of unparalleled with their ability to uh, navigate the visual spectrum as we know it. As if like I think that we could all just give the thumbs up, like, cool, these animals get it, they know how to see stuff, good for you. That's where the midband comes in. uh, with there's not a lot, a few animals out there that have a elongated pupil that can see above and below, usually the water line. So here's water. I know it's green, it's filled with algae apparently. There's a few fish in a snake species that, let's say here's fish. Their eye will sit here. I know it's a big eye. It's all part of this big head. The eye sits here though, and the pupil basically allows them to see above and below the water line, but it's still one solid pupil. With these animals, they have the midband region. So now we know this part right here is arguably the most complex eye in the animal world. Um, able to see in a billion colors, uh, transition into different lighting systems, things like that. All these ommatidia here for movement. And it's like nature just was like, whatever, at this point, you're good to go. So nature throws in the midband. The midband does two things. One, it separates the pupils into two separate focal points, each able to move on its own. Meaning, this is right here, this section is the most complex eye on Earth. It's got a pupil, it's got a million ommatidia, it can adjust the light variance and color settings on the television set. That is the most advanced eye ever. Then let's throw in this Midband. That is the most advanced eye ever. It separates the pupil into two parts and contains its own pupil. So each of these is combined the most advanced structure that we know of from a visual standpoint in the animal world. It allows trinocular vision in each eye. Each pupil is able to move independently of one another. Um, I don't know how to do it, but I'm sure you guys do. It's like having six cell phones out and doing those panoramic pictures all the time. Uh, you're able to see, with the exception of maybe what's right underneath your mouth, you are able to see 360 degrees. Your eyes are stalked, so they're above your body. They all move independently. You have six total pupils to move, all with arguably the best visual system in place. So you're moving six eyes around constantly. It's like a 360-degree moving panoramic picture. Um, the midband itself having its own pupil seems like a little overkill, but even the midband serves a separate, unique function from the rest of the animal. Again, another great, I think, great imagery there of you can tell where the pupil is and where the ommatidia are. So quick movements, detail, colors, saturation. And one of the things to keep in mind too, guys, is when we talk colors, if you're trying to look in this polarized or blue spectrum, uh, maybe if you're in a coral reef, it's important to discern a bunch of colors, but think about the ocean environment. Color also means depth. So light saturation doesn't just tell us, hey, it's getting darker. It also means it's getting deeper. So you're able to look out. If you're a mantis shrimp looking for a family vacation, you can just glance out onto the ocean and instantly tell this is toward shore, this is shallower, this is deeper, that's a coastal drop off. And you can get an instant readout of your entire surroundings just by flipping your crazy 6 point eyes all around the environment. To make matters more complex, now we know that they can see the 180 pack of Crayola. They're also able to detect other light settings. And this one's even harder for us to think about. Again, I know I'm asking a lot of you guys, like, hey, think of colors you've never seen before. That's impossible. You can't think of a color you haven't seen before. These animals have seen it, though. And on top of all that, they're able to adjust their vision to different light sources. Uh, Infrared is believed that they can adjust their light to, and ultraviolet. The midband region itself, so that midsection, is very sensitive to polarized light. Um, Again, polarized being more associated with depth than anything, but they're able to see and navigate light sources that we've had years to come up with technology and we still don't understand. The, again, stalked appearance of them, the structure, the way they function, you're as close to 360-degree panorama, all the midband and the two pupils on either side of it, all able to move independently. You're basically constantly, it's like the Google Earth car that drives around and is taking the 360 of the entire neighborhood, and you can do that street view. That's kind of how the eyes work. You're not able to see in the car basically, but everything else you have a constantly rotating camera going off and assessing the world around you. The I got a little ahead of myself, I guess. Again, that spectral sensitivity. If you're switching to polarized light, you're looking more at depth than anything. Um, it allows us to decide where drop offs are, things like that, or if we want to move to that area, we're going to go to a darker polarized light. Of course, it includes night vision and things like that. So UV from sun, moon, etc. Yeah, just it couldn't be any more complex and advanced. So why would nature take this crazy, freaky looking, multicolored monster and give it all these adaptations? Well, a couple theories are out there, and there's not one that's proven, obviously, because we weren't side by side with Mother Nature when we designed this freakish monster. But there are a couple theories, and it's probably a combination of all of them. The first one is the prey theory. This makes a lot of sense. If you decide to separate from Malacostraca and become an ambush predator, it makes sense that as you sat there, again, think about hundreds of millions of years of evolution, the one that sat there with the best eyesight was probably going to get the most prey items, probably going to pass on its genetics. Um, Whereas ones without the quick movement and the good eyesight are going to die off, not be able to pass on their genes. So obviously, it makes sense that because you're detecting fast moving prey and have a one shot uh, spearing or javelin out to impale your prey, it makes sense that you want to be as precise as possible. So that's where the prey theory comes in. The other interesting strategy here is that they've incorporated this into mating as well. The couple things factor in here. First of all, is just seasonality of what is breeding season. If you're able to see in moonlight specifically, you can, I mean, it's way like picture your ultimate sundial. You're able to tell if the season's changed, what part of the year it is, what time it is, how long the moon's going to be out. And so you know that's going to affect seasonal changes, both for food sources. If it's spring, maybe everything's coming to life, you know, you're about to eat. So their visual range has allowed them to coincide uh, seasons with breeding and tie those two together. And the animals themselves, again, being so brilliantly colored, are able to actively fluoresce and move. Remember, we talked about the Europods, um, the attachments to the tail there. They're able to, again, kind of show up like rudders, but they'll flash almost a kind of Morse code. The part we don't understand is that, let me go back a slide or two. Let's get a picture of one. There we go. We see obviously a lot of colors already. We see this green. Uh, what else is there? Blue, pink, black, dark green, red, browns. We see what we see. There's a good chance that these animals are seeing significantly more. It's like looking far away at a finger and then seeing the fingerprint up close under a magnifying glass. We know what we see, we know what it is, we know our colors. There's a good chance that these animals see in such complex systems that the coloration on this animal is, and again, it's a stupid lecture. I don't know how to describe what these animals would see. Um, Colors that probably would astound and amaze, and who knows, for all we know, it might like shut down our brains. It might be sensory overload, seeing that much finite detail. Um, but that's the animal we're dealing with here. So they're able to fluoresce. They move different parts of the body for different communication styles, and the animals are all able to pick up on that based off their advanced eyesight. The last one, and this one makes a lot of sense. This will come up, just so you guys know, in a lot of different applications, not just mantis shrimp. And that's the human brain theory. We call it the human brain theory. Basically, when you have a structure on an animal or a person very advanced, it usually means that the structure is doing all the work and the brain isn't putting it all together. It's the structure. In this case, the eyes. Uh, the eyes themselves are what's complex. It's not the animal's brain. Uh, this is not full disclosure. Do not do this. I am not advocating for this. But if hypothetically someone was to try to walk up or down the stairs and close one eye, you lose a lot of that 3D depth perception you need. And again, don't do that. That's silliness. But in theory, that's what would happen. Uh, the reason for that is as humans, our two eyes seeing out allow our brains to formulate a picture and judge depth, get a recognize faces, things like that. That's our brains doing the work, though. The eyes kind of taking the Polaroid picture. Our brains are what's thinking about it and making sense of it. That's how you're able to recognize your friends versus a complete stranger. It's not your eyes saying, "Oh, immediately, this is a friend." It's our brains doing the work. With hawks, for example, able to see something moving on the ground thousands of feet below where they're flying, etc. Swoop down. The eyes saw that. The brain's not putting a lot of that together. Same with bloodhound and their nose. Um, they know that they smell something, they can stay on that scent, but the brain's not formulating a lot of complicated processes here. Uh, Same with mantis shrimp. Brain is very, very tiny. And so the eyes are kind of, it's like having that panoramic picture on your iPhone, but then you never looked at the picture again. You know your phone knows about it, but your brain isn't going to process any of that. I'm not even going to review my photos, look at what a good selfie was. Like I'm calling it good. My phone gets it. That's all I need to know. Uh, so the human brain theory does play a big role in the ideas behind how the mantis shrimp eyesight got so complex. Since we've discovered this, pretty wild the applications we've put them through. Because these animals basically see in polarized light and can attune themselves to that. We've learned some training methods and behaviors with these animals. Uh, Certainly, if any of you get to go off and do this, please send me a postcard. Some of the coolest studies being done. I've worked with mantis shrimp, but definitely not in the biomedical field setting. Um, they basically see in, I don't want to say X-ray, but very close to it. Uh, Polarized light bounces off cancerous cells differently than it does standard human tissue. So at the University of Queensland, they've trained mantis shrimp. People walk in the building, walk by the mantis shrimp tank. Uh, Again, usually food motivated, so the animal probably has seen a snack, so knows food might be coming. But you walk past a mantis shrimp, and they've taught them to tap or punch if they detect cancer anywhere on the body. You save yourself an entire CAT scan, people going through and dissecting, bisecting, running tests, all this stuff. You can have a cancer detecting stomatopod literally do your reading for you. Not a psychic reading, but I mean, as far as how weird and alien this is, almost like that. Uh, and they've trained mantis shrimp to come out and tap if they detect cancer anywhere on the body. Um, and it's because they can just see in that spectrum already. Then, of course, they're rewarded with a little piece of shrimp. You hopefully go on your way without the animal tapping on anything. Um, Certainly, if we all have to worry if mantis shrimp start getting annoyed with us and they just start tapping all the time, everybody will get really nervous. Uh, but hopefully they stay put and keep the serious note about their role. But man, like if we're already finding out they can do this, there's got to be a lot more to investigate. Being able to just visually detect cancer versus healthy tissue on a person, I have no explanations why we wouldn't be sinking more time and money into the research of these animals. So, hey, nature said, let's give them these cool eye stalks, make sure they can see everything, stuff way outside of the normal spectrum. In case that wasn't enough, let's make sure they have some chemosensory functions as well. This is where the antennae and antennuals come in. Uh, Again, I know it sounds kind of gross, but typically what you're going to detect is waste compounds, so ammonia and nitrogen. Um, that's what's going to be kicked up by any living organisms. Breathing, even, it's not necessarily like animals going to the bathroom. Just breathing, of course, gives off ammonia while you're taking on oxygen. So ammonia-borne odors and nitrogenous compounds in general. That's what's going to be a big chemosensory indicator. Uh, they're further amplified with the antennal scale. It's the equivalent almost of, we talked about the Europods back here, right? How they kind of operate a lot more dexterously uh, and are able to flap up, down, side to side, and show off different colors. We also have antennal scales that are able to do the same thing on the front of the animal. Here you can see them really good. Uh, the antennal scales are going to function again, from what we know in our visual spectrum, we know they're reflecting polarized light. The closest analogy I have for it, picture your old school either superhero, spy, terrorist type thing movies. Somebody's driving or flying a plane, and somebody on the ground uses the shard of glass or a mirror to create a glare. Um, Now, instead of just a glare, it's different lighting at different patterns, different rates, and it's a visual equivalent of Morse code. So they're able to flash these antenna scales, show off different kinds of lighting and at different patterns and rates, and communicate within the species. The reproductive styles even get more complicated here. There's so much going on with these animals. Again, it's why they have their own day to be talked about here. Uh, excuse me. Differences are vast and very interesting because it really affects their behavior as well. The breeding style is very odd. It's unlike almost any of the other decapods. It's not to be graphic, but it's almost very similar to how mammals copulate. With here, we've doubled things up. There's a pair of copulatory organs. They become erect during breeding. They're inserted into the female, and these animals are capable of creating a sperm plug, which is something you might have learned in mammals. Another very odd mammalian characteristic when it comes to actual reproduction. Oops, sorry, I'm trying to click something off my screen here. The conditions and environments that these animals would live in, again, usually good indicators from what we see on the terminal end of the raptorial appendage. Primarily, they're going to be shallow water, meaning, I don't want to word this. There's so much that goes, and I know I've harped on this the entire semester, but every time we say something just very generalized and easy, like, oh, they live in shallow water, think in the back of your head what that really means. It's going to be high light levels. So tons of plant life, more than likely. It also probably means warmer. There's a lot more that goes into it when we say a shallow water. Another term is like tropical. You guys know there's a lot more in that than just, oh, it's tropical, so it lives with a palm tree. There's a lot to read into all of these kind of common terms. The living conditions, though, and the environment, like I said, are usually based, and we can tell what they live in, based off that raptorial appendage. As far as intelligence levels, turns out, despite that tiny brain, and this is one of the cool things that's out there right now. Like, this is something that you could aspire to go out and do because it'd be a super fun experiment. We found that they've learned incredibly quickly, but we're not sure if the brain's actually having the memory or the eyes themselves are. We have a experiment set up where they painted a flask or a hide, basically, and gave them no other cover. The stomatopod scurried around the tank trying to find cover, eventually gets to the flask, rests, and then they took the flask out. So the animal had no hiding place again. Every time they set this up, significant improvement on every subsequent attempt to find the hiding spot because they started recognizing what that flask meant. 52 hours in the first attempt to find a proper hiding place, and then 4 tries later on the 5th, it only took them an hour. So could be luck, could be these animals have, I guess the good term would be like muscle memory, if that makes sense. The eyes are able to remember something. We don't know if it's the eyes or the brain making the connection, but there is a very understated part to their intelligence and memory level. Before we go any further, does anybody have any additional questions? We've covered all the vision stuff. We're going to move into the raptorial appendage and their function. But any questions so far about um, visual aspects and the spectrum that they're able to see, all that stuff. All right, sweet. I just know it's a lot to process and stuff that's way outside of the realm of normal things we are used to comprehending. So, if we're good there, let's talk more about these crazy, insane animals. Uh, Again, like I was saying, the raptorial appendages kind of decide for them where they're going to live. Your spears are going to live in usually sand, substrate, whatever you might be in. It's going to be soft. You're going to be able to burrow in it. And typically, you sit with the head outside the burrow and wait for something to come by. We thought for a long time they basically just buried themselves in mud and hung out. Turns out they're digging complex cave systems. The longest one we found was over 30 feet long, had several entrances and exits. So it's like a true burrow. It's not like they just wedge themselves and cover themselves up with sand. They're digging habitats. Uh, so more complex there. Why not at this point? It's par for the course of these animals being much more complex than we gave them credit for. So it does make sense. With spears, we're typically not going to find animals that have conflict. We're not going to find animals fighting one another for space because you can dig your home in any area of soft substrate. So they're far and away the least aggressive between the species. Spears, if they get kicked out of their home, no, you can walk a couple feet away and dig a new hole. So it really cuts down on the interaction, dominance, threat displays, things like that. Exact opposite true for the smasher species. All your smashers have a very niche environment where you're residing within coral reefs. So you're going to want, if you find a good place, you're going to want to keep it. And so there's a lot more interspecific confrontation between the two. Animals are going to be constantly trying to kick each other out, find a appropriate nesting site, a place for breeding, and it's kind of like, well, geez, I mean, Colorado Springs is a good example. Like at this point, like, hey, no vacancy, everybody. We're full here. Go live on the outskirts of town. Try Highlands Ranch. Like Colorado Springs is almost at the max of how many houses we can build here. We're becoming smasher species here in Colorado. Pretty soon, we're going to say, get out, go build your house somewhere else. There's a limited capacity here. Whereas, again, a place that's inhabited with much more space to move, that would be your spears. We could just go dig a new hole, build a new house type thing. There's still tons of vacant lots open to you, if that makes sense. Housing them, they are extremely, again, most people want to house the peacocks, which are smashers. You want to house them individually. It can be done with a mated pair, but just especially if you're going to try this on the hobby side, just do it individually, just as a favor to me. Really, really risky housing them together. Everything about these animals stems from that, raptorial appendage. Breeding, interaction with one another, rival species, prey acquisition, deciding on what substrate and what environment you're going to live in. Is it a hard coral reef or soft sand? Am I going to spear fish or smash bivalves? Am I going to fight rivals? Am I going to just move homes? Everything comes down to that raptorial appendage. When it comes to the confrontations that do happen, again, we're going to see this much more often in smasher species, the ones with the club. The fighting that goes on in the competition is it's very strange. Typically, with let's just take mammals for example, like bighorn sheep. With bighorn sheep, you're going to have violence, yes, but you're not going to go to a fatal level typically. Giraffes, another great example. Yeah, it's horrible and violent and scary to watch, but you're not typically out to kill the other one. With mantis shrimp, they're so powerful that you kind of have to choose one or the other. You have a ton of, picture this like um, the lamest guy ever bar fight where they just sit there and kind of talk smack and they're like, no, you hit me first. No, you hit me first. Throw a first punch. Do something about it, type thing. You have a lot of talk and buildup, but when that first punch is thrown, it's usually fatal. So it's guys in tank tops pushing each other back and forth, saying, no, you go first 500 times and talking smack to each other. Once that haymaker comes, though, it's game over. So we don't see that too often in the animal kingdom. Animals that are going to fight in competition, of course, we typically see threat displays, but then kind of once you cross that barrier, it's game over for one of the individuals. We don't see a lot of fatalities occur in competition. Here we do. They're going to be able to use a ton of defense mechanisms. Their telson is flexible enough they can basically turn from a straight line animal into a curled up C or even an O shaped. So they'll flip that telson up, cover their heads, hopefully end and retreat. The actual combat portion, like I said, though, is definitely the last resort because it does mean that one person's not leaving. With that threat display, this is again the guys outside pushing each other and talking smack in each other's faces. We get to what's called the mural spread. The mural spread is take your who's popular nowadays, like The Rock. Yeah, he's relevant. Take The Rock. The Rock. This is like The Rock when you start getting into it with him at the club. He stands up, and it's the equivalent human world of kind of taking off your jacket and then holding up your bicep. This is where the mural spot is exposed. It's on the inside of the bicep. So if you're doing a flex right now at home, got your arm pumped up, it'd be where you're outside of your armpit, but still where the arm normally is tucked against the body. This is like a cool barbed wire tattoo or something tribal or a heart that says mom in it, where your cool tattoo sits on the inside of the arm. And you're only going to show that when it's go time. This is mantis shrimp wise the equivalent of kind of cocking back to throw a punch. Basically, these animals stand up, all the maxillipeds flare out. It looks like, if you guys have all seen the movie Predator before, it looks like when Predator has its disgusting, gross mouth closed, and then when all four parts of it like open up and get really horrifying. It's a big dominance display, but as soon as that mural spot is shown, it's literally like cocking back for a punch. If one opponent doesn't retreat after the mural spot is shown, it's go time. So now all the guys are pushing each other outside the bar, saying, hey, you hit me first, you hit me first. And this is the equivalent of one guy getting ready to hit. The other guy better either duck and leave or get ready. And that's what you can tell from both these pictures, both smasher species. Typically, the mural spot's going to be much more dominant. The spears don't use it nearly as much. The smashers are the ones that get in all these crazy fights at the club. Again, effectiveness it's hit or miss, literally and figuratively. If the mural spot is shown, usually it's going to result in the opponent running away. And if not, you've already got you know what's coming next. It's not like a mystery. So it's either about to go down or everybody out there that's like, fight, 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 is going to be really disappointed. So it is the imminent precursor to an attack, but it also carries a lot of weight in this community of mantis shrimp. So usually doesn't result in fatalities, but if it extends past that, yeah, it's game on. Going to go through this kind of fast, so please stop me if you have additional questions. We got a limited amount of time left. We see even more complex behaviors amongst these animals. Some species are entirely monogamous. This is extremely rare in invertebrates, not just decapods, or not just crustaceans, excuse me. Um, Animals that pair up for life and remain loyal to one another. Um, the lifespan of these animals can extend up to 20 years in some species. What is unique that we found, and at least this is just from what we've observed, there's not a ton of science being poured into, a lot of funding being poured into studying these animals. Uh, if an animal loses a mate, maybe to age, predation, things like that, they don't go out and remarry. From what we've observed so far, they settle down, find a single mate, and again, this is just some species, the monogamous ones. If that mate dies, they'll spend their rest of their life in solitude. They won't pair up again. Again, that's what we know. I don't want to say it like it's complete fact. It's not like an episode of the invertebrate version of the Notebook. Um, it's surely there's an exception out there, but from what we've observed, I can say that confidently. They do pair up for life. During breeding season and when it's time to have offspring, they in today's age, I never know how to word this. Uh, Typically, they take on kind of the traditional gender roles where female stays at home and tends to the eggs, male goes out, hunts food, brings home the bacon. But they're very progressive. It's 2020. Come on, man, to shrimp, get with the program. They do, if food is plentiful, kind of swap roles and take on 50-50 of each. Uh, During times when the season allows for it, the female will lay two clutches on two different sides of the den. The male and the female will each take care of a clutch each, and each go out and split the kind of shopping, if you will. So they're very progressive as far as couples and gender roles go. They're keeping with the times. Um, they're divvying up all the traditional roles within the household. So again, I know I'm kind of making fun of it and talking light of it now, but this is a pretty big jump as far as invertebrates go to see this level of quote unquote intelligence and behavior occur. Uh, we're talking about a kind of funny and now male and female are both taking care of the kids and out shopping, but it is a big deal when it comes to the advanced development of these animals. The courtship rituals are very similar to what we talked about with threat displays. A lot of visual cues, flashing uropods, flashing antennal scales, maxillipeds going all over the place, fans moving, twisting, articulating, and bouncing off different light spectrums we can't see, showing off different colorations we can't see, possibly actively fluorescing that we can't see. So this is like passing a note to somebody in class and the teacher can't see the note. They can't see the paper because our spectrum isn't there. Very advanced communication styles with reproductive biology for these animals. As far as we know, they take this one step further. The stomatopods, so mantis shrimp in general, are the only that we know of invertebrate type with the ability to determine whether or not an individual has mated or not. This is important because let's say two males are going up, these are non-monogamous now. Two males want to compete for a female. They can either chemosensory or visually detect whether or not the female has mated already. Could be a combination of both, but it'd be like, and I'm sorry to be crass, but it's the equivalent of being on the dating scene, going up to talk to somebody, and she has a ring on her finger. They're able to instantly say, like, nope, I'm not even going to waste my time buying this person a drink, slipping them my number on a napkin type thing. I know it's stupid, but it's a logical way that most people are familiar with. They're able to instantly identify whether or not a female, sometimes a male, are quote unquote like wifed up. I think that's the cool kids term. Um, it's it doesn't seem like much to us as humans, but it's a big deal with invertebrates. With invertebrates, there's a lot of times where and everybody deserves presents and gifts and flowers, but there's a lot of times when inverts will waste their time trying to impress an animal, another individual that's perhaps already in a monogamous relationship, already engaged, already gravid, or has been impregnated. And it's a huge devotion of time and resources. These animals are able to tell right away, oh, she got a ring on it, and then leave that situation and go attempt somewhere else. Uh, Again, another situation we're kind of talking about lightly, but this is a evolution wise huge jump in, I guess, what you'd call intelligence, or certainly recognition, muscle memory. And we're not sure all the answers to this, but man, it's very interesting study wise for an invertebrate to be able to detect mated species. They'll also be able to detect, again, in that scenario we talked about earlier, where female and male are monogamous and have mated. Male dies, let's say he gets eaten by a shark. It's the start of like Finding Nemo. Males that still cruise along and are about to knock on the door and say, "Hey, how you doing?" They'll be able to tell that the female is a monogamous species that has bred before and therefore isn't interested in any new potential suitors. Big deal. As far as that odd breeding style, again, this is where they separate themselves out. I told you guys it was very mammalian like. We call them peonies. It sounds like a silly form of the penis, the male copulatory organ. But there's a pair, so it becomes ES instead of IS at the end, representing there's multiples. Very, very. I know it's a little strange, but guys, we're talking invertebrate breeding. It's got to get weird at some point. Very odd mammalian characteristics. I know I said it, but picture your typical mammal. Let's just say there's lions breeding. It's not crazy to think about the male lion mounting the female. Male's copulatory organ becomes erect and is able to impregnate the female. We have an invertebrate species here. You have an exoskeleton. You should be very limited as to how your body is designed. You shouldn't have parts of your body that become erect or deflate, so to speak. But sure enough, mantis shrimp have done it. The peonies erect themselves, so become they're a cross between an exoskeleton and kind of mammalian tissue, where the animal's truly able to perform intercourse and copulate with the female in almost a doubled up way that mammals are. This is crazy to think about that this is happening with invertebrate species, animals that are limited to the confines of their shell. What takes things a step further is one of the peonies is the sperm transfer organ. So what we would think of the traditional penis. The other one, basically, and I'm sorry if this comes off crass or anything, but this is just how it works. It's the best way I know how to describe it properly. One inserts the sperm, the other goes in after and deposits what we call a sperm plug. It's a mucosal deposit that blocks the opening to the female's gonopores. It's leaving behind, and again, sorry guys, I'm trying my best here. This is always a fun topic to talk about properly. It's the equivalent of the male copulating with the female and then putting a plug or almost a condom type thing into the female so that no matter what, if she copulates after, that sperm won't take and the female won't be fertilized by anyone but that initial male. It's definitely not unheard of with mammals. Dogs do it all the time. It's most noted in canid species, but very strange to see it represented here with inverts. So two copulatory organs performing the exact same functions that we see in a lot of terrestrial mammals. After the female is fertilized, she's going to, internal fertilization, of course, helps guarantee all the offspring are viable. She's going to extrude these through the gonopores. Um, it's almost like a fabrication sewing line. You're going to pull out a pearl necklace, a string of eggs, and as they come out like a assembly line, each one is fertilized by the sperm as they emerge. Uh, it allows the female to copulate, then leave, go get a good bite to eat, make sure she's reproductively viable and ready to have eggs, and then start the process whenever. Um, that's what the both internal fertilization and that sperm plug help with. She's able to. It's like I don't know, the human equivalent of like, hey, I want to get pregnant, but after St. Patty's Day, so I can go out and party type thing. I know I have the material here, and when I'm ready, when I feel confident that it's baby time, I can start extruding these eggs through the gonopores. I know that the sperm is there to fertilize them, but it's very favorable for both offspring and the female to be able to kind of choose when the offspring are going to be fertilized and born. This is what we talked about. The two functions of both copulatory organs. And again, sperm plug material is just, it's not the topic everybody wants to talk about first thing in the morning, but it's a huge deal from an evolution standpoint that we see something that would traditionally occur with mammals. If the female is going to care for the eggs, she basically extrudes them and then slaps them up against the wall above the mantle place, and you can look at your kids grow every day. Yes, some parental investment, but she still has some work to do. Uh, the eggs need to make sure that they have constant flow of water. So she typically sits there and uses that telson in the uropods to fan water on them. Um, they don't just sit as a decoration on the wall. She'll take care for a couple weeks of the offspring, making sure they are aerated, have enough water flow. In some species, after they hatch, they basically sit until their exoskeleton hardens, and then she kicks them out of the nest. They all float up and become part of plankton, and then eventually will settle back down on the seafloor, hopefully away from their parents so that they're not causing competition. The non-monogamous pairs, and this is again kind of one of these weird relationship dynamics where we see a relationship occur with monogamous species that kind of takes on, again, eerily familiar human roles, where those gender roles of the female tending to the eggs, the male goes out and hunts. With non-monogamous pairs, they almost don't have their partner to help out. And so typically the female will forego eating or doing any hunting while tending to the eggs. So it's a lot riskier being a non-monogamous pair of stomatopods as opposed to the other way around. The pairing, however, the one thing non-monogamous pairs have in common with monogamous pairs is that the male will stand guard over the female before she, I don't want to say gives birth, but before she actually breeds and allows the eggs to be attached to the wall usually. With non-monogamous pairs, as soon as she spawned and he knows, like it's kind of like waiting in the delivery room. You see that the baby's born, it gets in the little baby incubator, and then you say see you later. So they'll at least provide protection until the female has the offspring. But with non-monogamous pairs, the male's typically gone right after. He won't come back and visit. He's not going to call or write. I know it seems mean, but it's worked for these animals for millions of years, so let's not knock it yet. Um, just very odd that we have this. It's not the right word to use, but it's okay for this lecture. This odd emotional intelligence with how these animals operate and how they interact with one another. Very, very unique amongst invertebrates. Heck, some of us would argue that's unique among humans. Like it's astounding how far these animals have come, both with their natural evolutionary adaptations and the behavioral displays they exhibit between monogamous, non-monogamous, the breeding cycle, the recognition of an animal that has bred or was once paired up. Lots of stuff going on here, lots of process. From what we know, the pairing up process does seem to become much more chemosensory than visual. It sounds weird. What we think right now is that basically the animals smell the eggs or the eventual production of eggs from the female. So as, let's say you're a spear, so you're cruising around the mud, looking for burrows with possibly females that are open to mating, you can tell instantly, oh, this female's already got a clutch of eggs. This one's about to produce eggs. This one, it's like whatever the new dating apps are. Your chemosensor abilities are able to swipe left or right, whichever one it is. You're able to go through the dating app pretty quickly just off chemosensory function alone. You don't need to interact. You don't need to meet up. You don't need to go on a date first. You can just tell this female is already bred. This female's with childs. I don't know. It's a unique way to, again, we're talking about it with like a dating app, but think about animal wise, it's a huge devotion of time and nutrients, and possibly life and limb if you're going to combat someone for this. So huge leap as far as effectiveness of finding potentially breeding females. Just a sec, guys. Sorry. As far as those offspring, the hatchlings themselves kind of take their adult form and go through not necessarily a metamorphosis process, but true development. A lot of this has to do with the hardening of the exoskeleton too. Takes about 3 months. So let's get to the world famous raptorial appendage. This is, again, kind of these animals' bread and butter. And we're going to see different prey items along with different localities for both the smasher and the spears. Spears typically going to be much more ambush predator. They're going to wait at their burrows, only the eye stalk exposed, and of course the raptorial appendage. But let's stop and think for a second. What's the most logical prey item for them? Soft-bodied prey. So fish, shrimp, anything swimming nearby is typically not going to have a hardened exoskeleton or a shell. So if you're a spear, again, this is what I told you guys at the beginning. Now we know almost everything about you just by looking at that raptorial appendage. I know if I see a spear, hey, your habitat is probably mud, sand, substrate, things like that. You're not going to be super aggressive towards other members of your own species. You're going to spear soft-bodied prey, bring it back to you and consume it. And you're pretty flexible with your living conditions. You could dig huge burrows or just move a couple feet down the road and dig another den. So just from the raptorial appendage, I'm able to tell a lot. With the impaling action, this is a great shot here, similar to the amazing drawings I did earlier. But you see now how it's like a reverse praying mantis, if that makes sense. You can see it's designed not to pinch and bring back. It's designed to flex out, impale, and then come back in at a slower pace. And so that impaling method, very, very important to understand with these animals. And again, while they look like praying mantis, you got to understand it's a reverse invert version that functions completely opposite of that praying mantis type snatch. The smashers on the other end don't have that luxury of sitting and waiting because they're hunting typically bivalve prey, so hard shell prey. That's going to convert them into active hunters, which usually works out well because, again, all our smashers are typically hiding in coral reefs. So they have a rocky outcropping area they can go, a den but it's designed for them, whereas the spears can usually dig their own burrows. So you know you're going to have to go out and find prey. Typically, it's abundant though, because you are in a coral reef, and you're going to go out and start one of the creepiest and weirdest hunting styles in the animal kingdom. Um, you're going to go out. Let's just take a bivalve. Let's just say a clam. That's easy to talk about. Uh, you go out, you find a clam, and you're gonna dislodge it from wherever it's adhered to, and then usually take it back to your burrow. It's been observed these animals are incredibly smart at becoming more and more effective at taking down their prey. Meaning, if you're gonna fight a crab, they've learned within one or two interactions uh, to go up and basically punch the claws off first so that the crab poses no threat to you. Then you can pick it up and just drag it back home. Um, they're so smart when it comes to prey acquisition and hunting styles that within one interaction, they've it's kind of like picture like a video game where somebody presses the same button all the time for like a face punch. After you've dealt with them once, you know all you have to do is block this face punch. That's the only move they know. And you come up with a new hunting style based off that. So they'll go up to a crab, cripple them, then knock off their claws, drag the body back to their burrow. As if that wasn't already violent enough, once they do get back to the burrow, they have kind of a creepy thing right out of the Saw movies dungeon setup. Uh, if the coral reef typically that they're in doesn't have a hard enough surface, they've gone out already and they start collecting rocks and they create this weird torture rack rock wall within their burrow or den. Um, they'll bring whatever hard shell invertebrate prey they have, they set it up against the wall, and then it's the same thing as having like a punching bag, guys. They just start teeing off. Uh, they'll beat the hell out of whatever animal they have, a crab, a crippled, incapacitated crab, or a bivalve. They put it against the rock wall and then just start throwing haymakers. It breaks the shell up. Um, they're obviously going for the soft bodied protein meat inside. It's it's so weird because I know it's on a very small scale. It's not anything close to seeing like a alligator jump or a crocodile jump out and eat a zebra type thing. But violence wise, it's right there. It's on par. Uh, what's I don't want to say it's funny, but it's kind of funny. As they smash the crap out of whatever poor bivalve they've got, uh, they're doing this incredibly violent action, smashing the shell to smithereens, reaching in with those maxillipeds and plucking pieces of the soft-bodied protein out. Afterwards, they also, and sometimes in the middle of, like in the middle of this horrible beating, they start gathering up all of the shell fragments and they take them outside of the burrow and tidy up. It's like going crazy in the kitchen, but stopping to wash your pots after you're done. Um, it's a very weird dynamic to see from one individual. They're performing arguably the most violent act in the animal kingdom, and then stopping halfway through to make sure you pick up any bits and take them outside the burrow and set them nicely out there. Uh, very, very strange behavior to observe, and I think makes them just all that more intriguing with that little behavior.
What is the point of that behavior? Like why would they do that?
That's a great question and a great time for me to be for once in my life. I don't know. It makes sense, obviously, to clean the burrow after. You don't want a bunch of shell piling up. But the fact that they'll sometimes stop halfway through, um, so they've pounded most of this clam in half, uh, picked a few pieces of protein out, have some food in their system, and then literally stop, tidy up the work area, take some of it out, and it's bizarre. They spread it in front of their dens or burrows, and usually, not always, it kind of follows a pattern. It's almost like zero scaping your yard. Uh, It'll be a almost distinct welcome mat type pattern. Not always. Sometimes they just throw it out, but it makes sense to tidy up after you've consumed something so that your burrow or environment doesn't get too messy. But very strange that they'd stop midway through food consumption and then clean up. I do all the cooking at my house, so I know for a fact my wife would come in and be like, "Hey, you're starting to make a mess. Clean a few things up." So I get it, but I don't know why a mantis shrimp would. With the crazy, insane torture dungeon beatdown that's occurring, what's happening here is arguably, and I don't want to take away from their eyesight, which is the best ever, but maybe the best ever part right here, uh, has to do with this punching motion. The fact that once they bring a crab or a bivalve, a clam, an oyster, a mollusk back, they have it pinned against this rock wall. And then as they're punching it, this punch is one of the fastest movements ever in nature. The raptorial appendage, again, guys, remember back to that saddle, unfurls or uncurls itself and springs forward in about 2 milliseconds. Again, a time frame that's probably not relevant. Most people don't, we can't fathom what 2 milliseconds is. The strike of a praying mantis happens at 100 milliseconds. So yeah, it's a lot faster. Mantis shrimp and praying mantis aren't going to have a beef over this. They're not going to ever see each other to have this discussion. But yeah, if they did, the mantis shrimp a lot faster. It's faster than you blink, and most people don't even recognize or remember when they blink. So crazy quick, and with that's going to come a lot of power. The velocity that the raptorial appendage is released, and this is true for, we're going to talk about it with smashers because they do something a little more unique. But the spears release at the same velocity. They just spear. They don't have the impact at the end that we would see with a smasher. So punch equivalent of a 22 caliber bullet. And the other thing to keep in mind too, guys, this is happening underwater. You guys have all, like, either now or as kids, been to the pool. I know everybody, if you have a sibling, I know I used to try to punch my brother underwater all the time. You know how slowed down your movements are when you're trying to really go quickly underwater, completely submerged. These animals are underwater, so limited to those constraints, and still have this punch equal to a 22 caliber bullet. It's more than capable of punching through your standard safety glass on your aquarium. A lot of the times, you'll see them in small enclosures, but there's probably 3 inches worth of acrylic there. We can house them at our college in our tank. The glass meets the right specs, but even out of just, hey, it's still kind of risky. The college hasn't let me buy one yet, but as soon as they do, as soon as I can type up enough that I can prove I'm right, we will have them in the classroom because they're incredible. But very, very capable of, like, if you go to your dollar per gallon sale at Petco and PetSmart, yeah, that's not going to hold a mantis shrimp. They can punch through that very easily. So, all right, we've got greatest eyesight on Earth, craziest relationship breeding behavior, crazy chemosensory functions, and now we've got this crazy punch thrown in. As if the punch wasn't enough, this is where mantis shrimp, I think, enter into the Hall of Fame. And it's the formation of what we call cavitation bubbles. This is, I feel like it's on par for the day because everything we've talked about is so far off the human spectrum and the range of things we're familiar with. This takes on a whole new sci-fi level. This is the formation of basically a vapor, but it's really a displacement of water. We call them bubble voids. The correct term, though, is cavitation bubbles. What's going to happen here? And follow along. Let me know. because it's intense. It's it's weird because we're talking about an animal that's literally the size of obviously a shrimp. You can see the tiny bivalve in the bottom right of your screen, but what's happening is seriously like sci-fi movie stuff. If this animal was larger and lived on Earth, they would destroy everything. This would be like, I don't know, Godzilla level destruction. Uh, it's weird because um, it's kind of like in the Marvel movies. This is basically Ant Man. Does a lot of damage when he's huge, but when he shrinks down to ant size, it's all like very tiny damage. Um, I know it's a weird analogy, but these animals, if they were kind of quote unquote normal size, would be the most brutal, destructive monsters on Earth. We would all be bowing to our mantis shrimp overlords right now. Uh, the force that they're going to be able to exert changes the laws of physics on a true scientific level. We talked about that calcified elbow, right? There's a very sweet spot, a definitive ridge. So if that hits the animal, the shell is going to break apart. However, just as a backup plan, in case my 22 caliber bullet shrimp punch wasn't enough, uh, we've got the formation of cavitation bubbles. This results in the prey getting hit twice. You move that appendage and collide with a hard object so quickly and so violently that it literally, and again, I don't know how to describe this outside of sci-fi, creates, I'm not joking, the space equivalent of a black hole. You're completely underwater, but you've hit something so hard that you've actually displaced water and created vapor where it used to be. That shouldn't happen underwater. Um, it's not like blowing a bubble. It's creating a bubble out of nothing, and it creates. I know it's a weird analogy, but seriously, like a black hole in the middle of your galaxy that then will die and collapse in on itself because it's not natural. It shouldn't be there. So it's not a cute like, oh, I punched you and a bubble came out. No, this is like, oh, I've changed the physics and dynamics of science and the world around us as we know it. Get ready for the next impact. This allows for the prey to get hit twice. You have that initial 22 caliber strength impact. Then, and the reason I'm pointing this out is I want to be very, very clear, especially for test stuff. Um, it's not the formation of the bubble that causes the damage. It's the collapse in on that bubble once the water rushes in to fill that unnatural void you've created. And again, guys, I know right now nobody's gonna have a nightmare about a bubble forming on you and then creating the same power of the sun, but that's really what's happening. So cavitation bubbles makes it sound kind of cute. It's more. Um, we've got this initial strike, then we've got the shock wave from the bubble collapsing in on itself. This produces the almost third hit of the whole deal, which is sonoluminescence. And this is one of the coolest phenomena out there. There's not many things that can do this. So, sonoluminescence is the term for producing a small amount of light. And I realize this is like a shrunken down scale. Again, I know. But let's take into consideration what happens here. You walk up on an unsuspecting bivalve, take it back to your den, put it on the rock wall, punch it with the strength already of a 22 caliber bullet. That initial hit, if you get the sweet spot, already going to do some serious damage. Then the displacement of water around there creates a cavitation bubble, which then collapses in on itself because it truly is like it's the equivalent of if a sun were to die. You have all this water rushing back in. Yes, on a very small scale, I get it. But water collapsing back in on itself, replacing and righting the environment. And when that happens, there's enough energy and force there that it produces almost like trying to flick a lighter and get a fire started, that initial spark. You have a tiny bit of light formed. For us, we are all too accustomed to flipping on a light switch and knowing how to create our own light. For mantis shrimp, if you create your own light, You literally flash boil the water around you. It's quite literally creating a mini solar system. You've created a black hole, water's going to crash in, light is going to be formed out of nothing. It's not a spark, it's literally the formation of light through force. Um, as the water collapses in, this light forms, and you basically hit about 30,000 degrees in a tiny microscopic spot on this animal. So you've hit it once with a bullet, you've hit it twice with the collapsing shockwave, and now you've flash boiled whatever part you're punching. Um, it's if the scale was larger, like I said, guys, this would be catastrophic damage. It'd quite literally be on par. If this animal was larger, like it would be on par with like a meteor hitting. It would change the makeup of the universe around you from this one hit. It's that fast. Producing sonoluminescence underwater when there is no light and getting a light out of that. Like I said, it's sci-fi stuff, but just be glad they're small. I guess that's what we have to go for.
What would
What
happen if like somehow a human being got hit with one of these?
So they have been hit. I've haven't been like full on smashed, but certainly caught the um, I don't know shockwave of it from feeding these animals. It like I don't want to be like graphic or anything. It'll split your finger in half. Your fingernail. It'll split that through your finger in the flesh of your finger in half. No problem. It's not. You're not gonna. It's not like Iron Man shot something at you. You're not gonna fly away from the tank 30 feet and crash into a wall. It'll hurt a lot. Even their shockwaves kind of feels like snapping underwater, even if you're not hit directly. Like I said, it's a too small of a scale to actually kill us type thing or blast a hand off type stuff. But yeah, if they get you spot on, they'll split it right down the middle. I've seen people that a lot of the times, like I said, it happens with people doing trawling and fishing where they pull up a net full of fish, drop it down. They're standing there sorting through the fish. Yeah, they'll pop you one. Uh, it's just we're just the size comparison isn't there, so not going to kill you. You can still work with them, but yeah, they'll let you know when we do kind of shrink down in that Ant-Man sense, though. Like easily pound for pound and size wise, the strongest animal out there. There's not much that can match the eyesight, the coloration, the chemosensory functions, and the power when we shrink down to that size. They should be the apex animal out there. To add to that, not only should we be studying them because they're awesome, they're also indicator species. You guys, I know, have heard that term before. It's the canary in the mine. Animals that are going to tell us what's going on in our environment and if and what we need to change. So they're very, very sensitive with all these inputs, very sensitive to changes, fertilizer, agricultural runoff, things like that. They're going to be the first animals to die off in an ecosystem. So we definitely need to be studying and listening to them better. That's going to be the end of Stomatopoda. After this, we get into decapods. Again, I did this intentionally. Make sure you're remembering what parts of the body we labeled. Here again in this picture that we'll start off next week with, we've got modified walking appendages. The feeding appendages are all small and close to the mouth. That's what sets our sweet little stomatopods away from everybody else. So hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you have a new respect for our little 22 caliber shrimps and look forward to learning about decapods